Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, choir. For your generosity, we thank you. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm still not real sure uh, where to start from. Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened. This happened to me when I was a little kid. Be about 5 or 6 years old, maybe 6 years old. That'd be about 1958, 1959, thereabouts. We were living in some housing projects because my dad was still in college, so we were pretty dirt poor. The room, the way I remember it, it was like one room, very small. One side of the room was like the living room, and the other side of the room was the kitchen. And what happened was, my mom was in the kitchen, and she was ironing clothes. She had the window open. I remember the radio being on. I think it was playing country music, but that may not be true. And she had an electric iron, and she was ironing clothes out of a basket that she had brought in from outside, where they'd been hanging on a clothesline. Some of you may remember clotheslines, you know. Now, 5 or 6 years old, I was sitting on the floor in the living room, and I was playing with a book. And this was a book that some people had left a few days ago. And I remember the cover was kind of soft and it was pink. I didn't know how to read yet, but I liked this book because it was about the only one we had, and it had pictures. And the one picture I remember from that book was a picture of God. At least that's what I thought. And I remember this picture because I used to have terrible nightmares about it. The picture of God in the book, what I thought, it was like a statue, and the head of the statue was a kind of like a dog or a hyena. It was kind of an Egyptian-looking thing. It had a metal disc over the head, had these kind of twisty goat horns going up, and so you had this statue, and in front of the statue, about like this, there was a fire pit with fire. And there was some kind of a guy with like fancy robes, and he was holding out a living baby. And you knew he was going to put this baby in that fire, alive. And I used to have dreams that it was my dad, and my mom and dad were going to put me in that fire in front of God. And I had terrible nightmares like that. So now the people who had left this book a few days ago, they had been talking to Mom. And I don't know who they were or where they were from, but they were talking about heaven and hell. And I've been sort of sitting to the side, sort of listening to them talk, grown-up talk, And heaven was this place where good people went and good children went, and it was nice, and it was kind of like here, but better, and only good people could go there. I didn't know how to do that, but they said only good people would go there. And the other place, the bad place, was hell. Hell. Hell was where bad people went, and also bad little boys, which was where I was going. Because everybody told me I was a bad little boy, so I thought, I'm going there. And so hell was this place where there was fire, and everything was like burning and burning. And like your hair would be burning, and your face would be burning, and your clothes and everything would be just burning all the time. And that's where bad little boys go, okay? And then I wondered, what is that? What's that going to be like? My mom finished ironing what she was working on, and she went down the hall. And I looked at the electric iron. And I said, that's hot. Mom doesn't want me to mess with that because it's burning. She said, I'll get burned if I touch it. So that must be what it's like. What's it going to be like when I go there? Let's find out. So I was a little kid, so I couldn't reach the ironing board. So I went to the kitchen table, and I got a chair, and I kind of pushed it up against the ironing board, and I climbed up on the chair. And I looked at the electric iron, and I thought, hell, where I'm going, it's like that. And so I remember clearly when this happened, I raised my left hand, and because I knew I was doing something kind of solemn and serious, like a ritual, like in the book, I remember spreading my fingers like that, and I put my left hand down on the ironing board, and then I reached for the electric iron. I saw this iron a couple years ago on Broad Street. When I was walking around on Broad Street, they used to have a lot of antique shops and junk shops down there. And I walked into a junk shop, and I saw the same iron, the very one, on a shelf. It was made by General Electric, and it was big. It was made out of bakelite and steel, and it had a big, thick electric cord with braided insulation and a little dial on it. And I picked it up off the shelf, and it was heavy. That iron weighs a good 4 or 5 pounds. 5 pounds, easy. Not so easy for a little kid to pick up. And I was looking at that iron in the store. The junk shop guy came up. He said, that thing still works. It's a good iron. And I said, yeah, I know. My mom used to have one of these. I was just thinking about her. Give it to you for $10. I said, I don't know. I got an iron. Let me think about it. I'm just thinking about my mom right now. 5 pounds. Not so easy for a little kid to pick up. My left hand was here, and I picked up the General Electric bakelite and steel 5-pound iron, and I brought it over here, and I held it over my hand, and you could feel the heat coming down from that like a sunburn on the back of my hand. And I was thinking, hell, where I'm going, it's like this. It's going to be like that, but more. I wonder if little girls go to hell. Maybe it's just little boys, because girls are so nice. I wonder, no, maybe. I wonder if grown-ups go to the same hell that little boys go to. Maybe they got a different kind. Maybe it's a little worse for them. I don't know. Or maybe we all go to the same place. What's that like? Well, I guess it's like this. That's what I did. The burn scar on my hand was visible for about 20 years. After a time, it kind of faded. If you'd have seen it, it was a dark brown swoosh right behind my knuckles. I figure that's where the right front leading edge of the iron contacted my little 5-year-old hand. And it stuck there like a fried egg. And I was fighting to get that thing off of me. I was just crazy with pain. And it just hung on to me like a snake, burning me. And I fell off the chair, and I hit the kitchen floor, and that got the iron off of me. And I remember screaming and screaming, like in my dream. And I remember my mother screaming my name and running down the hall. And that's kind of it. That's where that memory stops. I had that scar on my hand for over 20 years. It faded eventually. There's nothing to see there now. There's no scar. So here's an interesting question. This is a question I really want to ask. In fact, if you think about what I just read, some of you are already thinking about this question. Anybody want to say out loud what it is? Is it true? Really? You did that? Are you kidding? Did you make that up? You don't know. You don't know. The scar's gone. It's a good story. Is it true? I've been telling myself that story all my life. If you want to know the real answer to that question, I don't know. That's the truth. I don't know. The historical facts are true. I really did that to myself. One fine morning when my mother was ironing, I picked up a General Electric steel and Bakelite iron, about 5 pounds, and smashed it down on my left hand. And I still remember what that felt like. But did I do it for the reasons that I just told you I did it? That was my first mystical experience. A mystic is a person from any religion, man or woman, any belief system, who wants to have direct experience of the sacred, to cut through the conceptual and go right to the thing itself. And that's what I did. That qualifies as my first mystical experience. Now, I figure a child psychologist would probably say, well, you know, you were just imitating what you saw your mother doing. She was ironing clothes, and so you decided to iron your hand. Yeah, that's probably what happened. It was probably something like that. But you know what? That story doesn't get me all the way home. That doesn't do anything for me. So St. Paul, is he right? The Jesus who got down from the cross and decided to be a carpenter and a father and a grandfather, that doesn't change the world. Was he really born from a virgin? Did that really happen? Virgins don't have babies because they're virgins. Was he really crucified? Did they put him in a tomb for 3 days, dead as a nail, and then suddenly he stood up on his hind legs, fresh as a daisy, started walking around, scared Mary Magdalene half to death? Is that true? Does it need to be? There's third-party evidence that Jesus actually lived, that there was such a guy. Everything else, you only know what you read in the Bible. But if he was just a guy who got himself in trouble, that doesn't matter. It's the story that came after. That's where the power, that's where the real truth is. St. Paul is asking an interesting question. What is truth? What is truth? Is the real truth the moral truth? Is that what matters? Facts don't change the world. Moral truth, the great story, that is what changes the world. The truth that makes you bigger than you are by nature. The truth that raises a man or a man's woman a height above the earth. And whatever clips off a man's wings, a woman's wings, that is false. A good religion, and I think in the course of my searching, I can kind of tell the difference between a good religion and a bad religion. This is a good religion because it gives you the opportunity to be bigger than yourself and more compassionate than yourself and more connected than yourself. Here is a harsh fact for you. You will not like this fact. But I know this is true. Those of you who believe in God, like I do, those of you who believe that God loves you or that you love God, those of you who refuse to believe in God because of the injustice and suffering that you see in the world, and those of you who haven't made up your mind one way or the other, you need more information, you will never know God. You will not. Neither will I. We will never know God, not the real God. The God of religion, the little God, the St. Paul God, that God, yeah. We all have an attitude towards that God, the God of religion. The real God, the God that brought forth wheeling galaxies and the universe and multi-universes and black holes and gravity waves and quarks and neutrinos and little furry kittens and venomous snakes and Popeye's fried chicken, that God, you're going to never know that God because that God is out of your reach. That God is too big. But the good news is that God, that real God, is trying to know itself through you and your story. The vast, infinite, unmanifested ocean of consciousness can have a wave rise on the surface of the ocean. The wave can never know the entirety of the ocean, but the wave can always know that part of the ocean that belongs to it. The wave is that vast ocean expressing itself individually in a specific form, and you are that form. And the story of that form is your story, and your story is nothing less than the story of the real God, knowing itself through your experience, the best and the worst of your experience. That little kid, that little idiot kid with his electric iron, he was right. He was right. He shouldn't have been playing with an iron, but he had the right idea. I admire that little kid, even though it was me. He didn't want to hear about hell from preachers up here. He didn't want to read about it. He didn't want to take a theological course in college to hear about the history of the idea of hell. He wanted to go right to it, which is what little kids do. He was curious, and he went right at it. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. He said it's the tiniest of seeds planted within ourselves, and then it becomes the greatest of herbs, the greatest of trees, and the birds make their home in its nest. What does that mean? It means that the kingdom of heaven is not, it's not a place, and neither is hell. It's not some Valhalla for goody-goodies. The kingdom of heaven is a process. It's a story. It's a process. The tiniest of seeds becoming the largest of herbs, so large that even it becomes a blessing on other creatures. Other birds and animals can live in its branches. It takes a long time for a seed to become a tree. That process is the process of your life, of your story. Coming into sacred being. Aren't you lucky? If you think about it, we live on this pale blue dot. We live on this planet in a vast, vast universe that we can't even measure. And yet in all this universe that we know about so far, there is only so far one place that has life. And you're there. And of all the different forms of life on this earth, of all the different varieties of consciousness that manifest on this earth, we have this very specific consciousness that seeks to know itself and to know things beyond itself. And you get to be one of those creatures. You get to be one of those waves of consciousness on this particular planet at this particular time in history. Isn't that itself a miracle that you can't explain? That you get to be here right now. Isn't that wonderful? To tell your story. Amen.